So we've got a few panelists here tonight just to chat through what's happened with WWDC. We'll go down the line and get you guys to introduce yourselves a little bit about yourself. Doesn't have to be too in-depth. Pablo, do you want to start with you?
So I'm a iOS developer. I work for ANZ. So yeah.
I just realised we have an all ANZ panel by accident. Sorry, that wasn't supposed to happen. Well, it's one of those ones where you reach for people you know that are nearby when you're looking for volunteers. Jane?
Yeah, apparently I'm an international guest here. I'm from New Zealand. I also work for ANZ.
And Andy?
I'm an iOS engineer. I mainly work on infra at ANZ.
And for those that don't know me, most people call me Bok, but I also work at ANZ. So yeah, entirely by accident, I promise. It really was. Mm-hmm. All right.
Also hiring. Well, no, I don't know. I have no idea. But yeah.
Just like, are we? I'm sure we are at the moment. Anyway, WWDC is what we're here to talk about, not talk about ANZ. I'm going to go straight to the spicy topic. What do we think of Apple Intelligence? Whether it be the name or what they're building? And we'll go backwards, so we'll start with you, Andy.
Yeah, I think it's a bit of a game changer. More in the sense of like how FaceTime was kind of a game changer for video calling, right? Like, yes, Discord did it, a whole bunch of other services did it, but like Apple has the ability to normalize these types of technologies and make it, or put it in the hands of the everyday people instead of just the tech people or the gamers or whomever. So I think it's going to be pretty great if they can sort of pull it off.
Jane, what do you think?
Well, I loved it, and the name wasn't too on the nose as well. I mean, it was like a play of the letters, obviously, but they nailed it pretty great. I love the Genmoji and the generative part of this to express themselves. Like, I'm a huge emoji fan. Like, I use them everywhere. Everyone who has ever received a text from me, like, have seen at least a dozen of emojis. So I think this is going to be really cool. And the bit where you can just delete people from the photos, that was my favorite bit. I think I probably rather expressed my love to this feature way too loudly when we were watching the WWDC keynote session.
And Pablo?
So the name itself, I don't like it so much, but I think the actual what it is, I think is very interesting. There's been a lot of talks that Apple is really behind AI and machine learning, and it's a little bit maybe not so true, because they tons of stuff that they have is being used in machine learning, but maybe not to the point that maybe some other companies were trying to bring in, like Google and Microsoft. I quite like the way the approach they're taking in terms of running like a very thin layer locally. Then if they can resolve it, jump into the private cloud. I think that's a very interesting approach. Yeah.
Nice. I think that's kind of nailed it, right? They were very moderate in their language until they made the Apple Intelligence announcement. Like, if it was machine learning, they called it machine learning. They didn't hype it up and pretend it was something else.
They never actually say AI. They say neural networks, they say machine learning, they never say AI.
They let you make that inference.
Yes. Yeah.
But for those who couldn't hear that was Siri answering.
It's creepy.
It's a little bit creepy. So you I think we like the name in general. Was the consensus? Or the way they've approached it?
Name's terrible.
Name's terrible?
Like, if I want to search for Apple Intelligence stuff, I have to say App Intel or Apple Intelligence. Is too long. Yeah. I feel like they could have abbreviated it, but that's the brand.
I mean, the notch on the iPhone 10, or rather was it like a series of those devices, was terrible. Like, there was on the market the already devices with no call out for the camera, no notches, nothing, just a plain screen. They didn't go for it because it was not as easily recognizable, and they did the same for Apple Intelligence. They are just producing branding their thing. Yeah. So I think for the product, for the company, that is a good thing. I mean, maybe not so easy to pronounce for us, and probably going to be some confusion between AI as in like a thing like a general set of products, and then the Apple intelligence gonna stand out of there, so it's good for them as a company. So I think they did like a brilliant decision on that.
Do we think they did that confusing the part around the word search term AI on purpose?
Phil Schiller, I don't know. Like, yeah, I don't know. It's going to be hard to sort of Google stuff when it's like typing in AI when I mean Apple Intelligence, but
Just
once
use
again,
Safari,
it's
it'll probably put it at the top.
yeah, exactly right. So
They're just gonna replace it for you.
we'll see. I'm not a fan of the name, but it's good in the sense it's like it's branding. It's going to stick.
All right, so we'll move on from Apple Intelligence for the time being. Were there any other highlights for the three of you? I mean, the non-Apple Intelligence, Pablo?
For me, definitely the new testing system approach. I think that's a really good one, and it's great because a lot of companies, it's very hard to start implementing the latest of, let's say, SwiftUI, or maybe migrate straight away to Swift 6. But testing it will be, I would say, a lot easier to approach because you can start gradually migrating tests once you have Xcode 16.
I think test files are also going to be much shorter because now you have the arguments. You can sort of like say like, hey, instead of me writing 5 or n functions, I can just put all these arguments in, and then that's going to be a time saver. And Swiftlint's going to be pretty happy with that too.
And it's going to be so much better for the project that are yet to adopt testing, because it's so easy now and so fun to write tests. There's like nothing stopping you anymore. You can just create a file and start doing that. It's a great point about early adoption, because usually we don't get to play with those shiny things until we already forgot they existed. But for the testing, it's the bit that we are provided like right now, so we can start working with that. And this is probably going to be driving for teams who are yet to adopt testing, or just like maybe improve the test coverage. So this is going to be like a moving thing. Hands down, testing was the greatest for me as well.
Yeah, to me also the readability, like being able to assign readable names to the tests and all of what it is, the tagging system, it's pretty powerful.
I think universally Swift testing at our company was the favorite.
Yeah.
And you can actually adopt it now. It's possible to do that. You don't have to wait for Xcode 16. Although obviously you don't get the IDE integration with that. But you can, it does work. Aside from, so we talked about Swift testing, was there any other standout items, Jane? Put you on the spot.
Yeah, I feel obliged
Doesn't
to
have
say
doesn't have to be
SwiftUI.
big. Could be small.
Yeah. Well, they did have a few improvements on the SwiftUI side of things. Nothing to I've seen so far was like impossible before, but it was achievable with much more friction. But simplifying that for developers is basically the general direction that we want to see from the company.
So no big new things, just made things polished and easier.
Which is all itself is a good and big thing.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, I think in general, quality of life for SwiftUI has been a great improvement. It's been evolving since 2019, and getting more and more sort of a approach to what you could do with UI Kit, and yeah, I think it's getting into a really good place now.
I don't have comments on SwiftUI, but I do like SF Symbols 6. I think that's pretty cool. It's helping people or developers make apps and glyphs delightful. I think Apple's sort of going in that way. They've been trying to do some weird stuff since iOS 7 first came out, but now you can see in their design systems they're starting to get a little bit more bold. Like the action button, setup, whatever. It's completely different. Yeah, I think SF Symbols 6, since you took Swift testing. Yeah.
You can share favorites. There's no rules here.
Nah, I'm going to be original.
Was there anything that we were hoping for that we didn't get?
macOS on iPad. You'd release this M4 amazingly powerful device, and then the best we get is a calculator, which is great, but I want you know, like I want to be able to dock my iPad and have like macOS run there and there. It would justify the $3,500 whatever the dollar price tag for the full kit. But that's my biggest letdown.
Pablo?
I was just trying to think. I had hopes for the iPad OS become a little bit better. Maybe I don't know if Mac OS is right away, but maybe a better Xcode playgrounds, like where you could do a little bit more stuff that you can do today. It's kind of like a good thing if you go on the train, you know, not taking a laptop and being able to do some development work on that. So yeah, I was kind of hoping for that.
Imagine compiling brain fart on iPad playgrounds.
It might be faster actually than the M1 Pros that we had. Was there a question from the audience, Alex?
I was thinking about the missing, like, better connection between the extensions and the main app. I feel that's still why it's difficult one, the communication between them and in a safe way. That's one I wish would be better.
Okay. The comment from the audience was the lack of updates to the communication between extensions and the main app. That's still just as painful as it's always been. Yeah. Jane, did you have something more?
Well, I'm honestly still waiting till they would present something that would make an iPad or Vision Pro, like to make it want to buy it. So like I used to own an iPad. It was just like it was my first iOS device actually, way before I started to use an iPhone. And back then, when you don't have an alternative to Apple ecosystem, that was fun. You could play games that were only available on iOS using some apps and stuff. Now everything is on iPhone, and I'm just still waiting for something breakthrough, for like, well, this is done for iPad. You can just use that because it's kind of like a middle device for like between Mac that I can carry. It's almost as light if you're having like an MacBook Air. And the phone that is like much more easier to carry in your pocket. So like every year I'm hoping for them to give me something, and they were like, well, here's a calculator, and here's like using your like equation stuff, which is already exist in other apps. Like Microsoft has Math Solver, for example. It's nothing new. That was already on the table. So it's same actually for Vision Pro. Last year they showed a few interesting things, like you can watch a movie. Well, yes, you can. They created a tabletop kit, also great, but it's going to be pretty expensive D&D session, like 42K right there. Also not extremely usable. So I'm just waiting for something more consumer related, consumer focused. So something that people can actually relate with.
Yeah, I think that was the surprise for me, was the updates for visionOS 2 were so minor to be basically non-existent, right? And it went from being this all, like last year's WWDC was all about that, and this year's WWDC is like, oh yeah, it's still a thing.
It's only been 4 months though, right?
It's true.
Yeah.
It kind of, so something that I've been thinking, kind of feels like they've been all hands on deck trying to get on with the Apple Intelligence stuff, because I've seen less content than previous years. In previous years there was a lot of other content, like good things about, I can't remember, but there were a lot of, I feels like there were more sessions and more content on the OSs.
Yeah, I think aside from the Apple content, the Apple Intelligence content, it does seem to be a pretty light on. Yeah. I skipped over, I didn't say my favorite one before, but my favorite for this year is actually not in any of the sessions. It's the 3 items in the release notes that say internal inconsistency errors. The fake build errors now gone. And what was the third one? There was a third one.
Explicit module.
I know that's a good one too. But there was another three big bug fixes in Xcode 16 that have plagued our team for 2 years now. Oh, Swift build plugins may actually work now.
I wish they would deliver.
Do I believe it? Says the wag in the audience. No, we'll wait and see. But the fact that they've acknowledged it is better than we've had in previous years.
I wish they would deliver the proper error, like description on the SwiftUI body function, because that's still a nightmare sometimes when you're missing something or just forgot to place a dot between in front of the function. and they're just like, I don't know what you're saying. There's the error message would be so random, and then you need to copy all the code out of this body function just to make sense of it.
Yeah, the big.
They started to build on the SwiftUI main visionOS sessions. They build this app with SwiftUI, so they more adapt to SwiftUI. Maybe they will make it more useful because they're using it now as well.
Yeah, this is that. So from the audience again, optimism that maybe now that Apple's actually using it internally, they might realize just how unusable it has been.
I would call it careful optimism.
Yeah, cautious optimism, absolutely.
Yeah, well, they should be starting to run into all the stuff that we normally run into. So, for example, a good example is the Photos app. I think it'd be interesting to see what they come up with next year in terms of collection views and stuff like that.
What do we normally go with from this point? Question: is anybody running the betas yet from from our panel members?
I am running it on my iPad.
One danger averse person.
I need to get to my own laptop
Yeah.
so I could run it.
That's fair. How are you finding the beta so far?
It's pretty stable, I'd say. I haven't run into, I haven't put it on the phone. You tend to notice more of the, bugs because you use it a lot more. But yeah, on the iPad it seems to be pretty stable in general.
Is that just because the Apple Intelligence stuff isn't enabled yet and there's not much without it?
Maybe, yeah. I think, yeah. Yeah, this is basically the icons, colors, and yeah. I don't think there have been big changes, as I was saying before. It's just minor subtle changes.
Anybody else planning? How many people in the room have run it already or are planning to install the beta? Oh, it's about 10%, 5 or so. Yeah. 6? Never the first beta. Yeah, I've been burnt too many times by that. I'll wait for the first public one, which is normally beta 2. I think there's also beta 1 gets cut very early, doesn't it? And then beta 2 is normally a fast follow from that. So hopefully next week or the week after I might take the plunge, but not on anything I use for work, obviously, because it's not reliable. Does anybody else from the audience have any questions? Got a hand down the back? So how are we thinking about SiriKit? Not strictly in a work sense, because that would be under NDA. But do you have any vision for what SiriKit might be used for?
That ties in with Apple Intelligence, right? Because it's using SiriKit APIs to sort of do the intents and whatnot. I mean, I was saying this like last year. Like, it feels like being iOS developers gets tougher and tougher each year. Like, you have to build more and more stuff. You can't really just build an app that pulls in some JSON and makes it JSON pretty. Now you have to have SiriKit. Now you have to have widgets. I mean, I have high hopes for it, but I had a friend who I knew a person who worked on SiriKit, and they didn't really have much positive things to say at that time. I'm not sure if it's still a thing or not, but like, I have high hopes. I think it's going to be really powerful. But then again, like, you sort of have to anticipate what your user wants, like all these edge cases, and I'm curious to see how people flesh that out in their own apps.
Like, I wouldn't think that prettifying JSON is all that other developers do, to be fair.
This is going back to iOS
Sure.
5 and 6, yeah.
Like, I was working as a React developer for like a year and a half, involuntarily, but it's a different story. And it's just as much of a learning curve. I just felt like obliged to defend this role of other developers as well. But as for Siri and integration to the app, that's usually for a lot of the companies would be a low-hanging fruit to create something like a tiny shortcuts to go to your app. Like, I was working on Letterboxd, and all of the shortcuts that are there still exist. All was done by me. They haven't edited anymore. Not sure why. But it's pretty fun to work with. I just love this technology in general, and I still how do you call it? Like, creating my own idea for this, for like to make use of Siri and app intents and shortcuts all combined. So I love this technology in general. So I might be biased, but I think it's really useful and should be adopted in as many apps. I mean, where possible and sensible.
Yeah, I agree with you, Jane. I think it offers a lot of possibilities of exposing little piece of your app. I think nowadays it's kind of difficult to develop an app and get engagement to the users with the app itself. You sort of need to expose bits of it, like with widgets and app extensions, and or app intents, shortcuts, etc. I think it sort of provides that new way of trying to get people using your app. But it really depends on the kind of apps that you are, looking to develop.
Well, this is exactly the guy from the WWDC video, what introducing app intents did. Like, he showcased how you can go further with your app functionality and not just make it work with shortcuts, but rather enhance the user experience for more difficult cases, and how to basically highlight your app every time you as a developer think that your app can solve users' problem. Basically put it right there. So like, I can do that for you. Use me. It's great.
I think year on year, Apple's investment in app intents as the core for expanding your app outside the app box is showing. And I think with the with Apple Intelligence, that's probably going to aid discovery more than anything. Because if you're just asking Siri for something else and it just happens to know that you have app intents in that area, maybe that'll do that way.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's how they all like thought of this of this whole thing, and this Apple Intelligence that it just decided like, now we're ready. We have given you all the bits and pieces to integrate your app within this new ecosystem that we have provided for you. Like, so here's the Siri, and she will like do that for you if you want, if you let her to. And years before that, it was just building this incrementally for developers to adopt. Like, you can just do this with your app, like feed that bit to Siri, and then you can do more, you can do slightly more, and then the next year, like fourth or whatever, and you can just like, hey, you already done all of that. You can just may as well, like he was showing, just teeny tiny bits of code here and there, because you already have all of that. Now you can just connect this, just like a final collect to this intelligence.
Yeah, what I find really cool about that is you can actually, as you were saying, reuse a lot. So a lot of the stuff, for example, that I done for widgets, using those app intents, and those little pieces, you can now expose them and use them for different stuff. So I like the approach that they've taken to allow to reuse the code that you're writing.
Fletch, question? So, comment from the audience is that the natural language recognition input is still probably the bottleneck for a lot of this sort of stuff, because Siri just can't understand you. Maybe Siri is now Apple Intelligent. I don't know. Well, properly Apple Intelligent and usable.
Oh, I have a tiny comment on that. You probably have noticed the accent. So I don't hold my breath on Siri understanding what I say.
That would speak to a lot of people in this room, probably, I think. Alex, question? They'd have to bring the complexity cost of a large language model down significantly to get it into the phone. But the first point of that, the comment from the audience, was the ease of creating app intents has got a whole lot better. I personally didn't realize that they'd moved away from the XML files to actually doing code last year. I missed that one, so that's very helpful. Jason. Question from the audience: the Apple ecosystem moves quickly. Should we be all learning PyTorch and create ML now, do we think? Is that where the future's going? Do we going to need to be able to do that to deliver features?
I feel like if Apple do it, they're going to do their own little spin on it. I'm pretty sure Chris Latner is now working on PyTorch, right?
Somewhere on the Python side of the fence, yeah.
Yeah, but he's also doing some Swift stuff with that. But like, I don't know. I feel like
he was driving Swift's Python integration at one point.
Yeah.
Interoperability.
I think, I don't know. I feel like if Apple do it, they're going to have Swift on it somehow. You know, even like a small layer or something like that. But who knows?
I think that would largely depend on the model that you need, and what you actually want to try to achieve that. So if the model is specific to your particular needs, that would be very difficult to find in other already trained models, then probably yes, but this is the large investment, because you're going to need a lot of data to train those models, and probably the effort might not worth it, again, depending on the needs of a particular app.
And I think you're also targeting a customer base that has an iPhone 15 Plus, right? So that's significant part of the customer base that can't run anything Apple Intelligence related because it's just not fast enough. Yeah, from the audience, do you need PyTorch for that? I guess the answer is no. Create ML supports a bunch of different things. PyTorch was just the example they used, and I think you meant in the general sense, right? Should we be all learning to create our own models now? And I think if you've done any work in the cloud computing space for the last couple of years, that's all they've been talking about, is training their own models and the tools available for doing that. So there are a lot more cloud services for creating and training models available. AWS does a bunch, Google does a bunch. Whether they can be used with Create ML and run on device, don't know.
It can't hurt. Learning PyTorch just can't hurt.
I think it's just broadly available and known for like doing exactly that. So if people would be willing to learn how to do that, or like need to have it to do that, they would probably end up Googling something and basically doing Python, because that's just broadly here available.
Yeah, and also a lot of the pre-canned sort of examples and projects, they all come with PyTorch. So, yeah, it's kind of like the path of less resistance.
And more tools in your toolkit is always a good thing. Anybody have one last question from the audience before we wrap up? Yep. The question was around the security risk involving app intents and trusting the system with your data. What do we think?
I think you always, it really depends on what your app does, right? Of course, any sort of a sensitive data or anything that you sort of require authentication is probably outside of scope. It's always being able to sort of prepare some pre-processed data, maybe running some sort of a background task in your main app, having something pre-digested and expose it through then an extension, right? And in terms of the app intents that execute actions would actually go into the main app, I think, normally just very simple tasks.
I wouldn't do any tasks that are related with people's data, identifiable data, etc. normally, if your app doesn't have any personal information, that's probably safe, depending on what your app is doing. I have an app that is just a board game counter, basically. It doesn't have any information. It doesn't even have the login credentials. So I'm pretty sure it's safe to feed all I have to Siri, because like I don't mind, right? It's just a board game score. I mean, it might be sensible for some people. Not for me. I usually win. Yeah.
When you say security concerns, like what examples? Yeah, I mean, in scenarios like that, like I don't have much experience with app extensions or intents and whatnot, but like I feel the review process would weed out a lot of those things, as well as, you know, you can't really build a successful app if it's known to steal PII. You know, like once word gets out, like something weird happened in this app when I copied a PDF, it's going to kill the app, and word will just sort of spread. And I feel like Apple will sort of take it down. So technology-wise, I can't really comment much on, but like the process-wise, I think iOS users or Apple users are pretty safely guarded against that for the most scenarios. Yeah.
To be fair, you unknowingly already share a lot of information with third parties using social media, logging into different apps and stuff like that. So I wouldn't trust any of those apps, especially if you ever read the terms and conditions. So I would be trusting Apple just a tiny bit more than I would trust Google or Meta, for example.
So the scenario question was around malicious apps installed on the user's device being able to harvest data with app intents. I think unless you're in a very specific type of industry or handling very specific kind of data, there's a very good chance that the user's email inbox is going to have way more personal information about them than you will ever hold. And in general, people tend to trust their devices with a whole bunch of stuff, right? But that said, every company has a different approach, different feelings about it. And if you're writing your own indie apps, you will either trust the system or you won't. And you can always wait for user feedback too before you adopt that sort of stuff. Pete, last question. Comment then. Pete will complain at the pub. All right, cool. Favorite Apple TV series?
Hands down, Severance.
So you're excited for Severance Season 2?
Yes. Very much excited.
During the pandemic, I read Dark Matter, and it's on Apple TV right now. I think I watched episode 7 of 9 last night. It's getting really, really good. So if you like multiversal stories, Dark Matter is a pretty good one.
Yeah, you two took the ones that I like.
He took his Swift testing, so I think that's
yeah,
fair.
It's fair. Okay. What's the one? Slow Horses. I like that one quite a bit.
No one wants to mention Morning Show. That was also quite good. I was hooked up.
You had your chance.
She can have more than one favorite. It's fine. All right. Well, in the interest of time, because we're coming up on 8 o'clock now, we'll wrap up there. Thank you very much for the three of you.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's it.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.